The Best That Money Can't Buy by Jacques Fresco. Chapter 1, Design for the Future. The future is fluid. Each act, each decision, and each development creates new possibilities and eliminates others. But the future is ours to direct. In the past, change came so slowly, hat generations saw minimal differences in the daily business of surviving. Social structures and cultural norms remained static for centuries. In the last 50 to 100 years, technology and social change accelerated to such an extent that governments and corporations now consider change management a core process. Hundreds of books address technological change, business process management, human productivity, and environmental issues. Universities offer advanced degrees in public and environmental affairs. Almost all overlook the major element in these systems: human beings and their social structures and culture. Technology policy and automation count for nothing until humans accept them and apply them to their daily lives. This book offers a blueprint to consciously fuse these elements into a sustainable future for all, as well as for fundamental changes in the way we regard ourselves, one another, and our world. This can be accomplished with technology and cybernetics being applied with human and environmental concern to secure, protect, and encourage a more humane world for all. How can such a prestigious task be accomplished? First, we must survey and inventory all of our available planetary resources. Discussion about what is scarce and what is plentiful is just so much talk until we actually measure our resources. We must first baseline what there is around the world. This information must be compiled so we know the parameters for humanizing social and technological development. This can be accomplished using computers to assist in defining the most humans and the most human. By the way, this book is PDF version, so there may be a few errors, and feel free to add whatever is necessary in the comments below. So again, first we must survey inventory of all available planetary resources, discussion about what is scarce and what is plentiful. It's just so much talk until we actually measure our resources. We must first baseline what there is around the world. This information must be compiled so we know the parameters for humanizing social and technological development. This can be accomplished using computers to assist in defining the most human and appropriate ways to manage environmental and human affairs. This is basically the function of the government. With computers processing trillions of bits of information per second, existing technologies far exceed the human capacity for arriving at equitable and sustainable decisions concerning the development and distribution of physical resources. With this potential, we can eventually surpass the practice of political decisions being made on the basis of power and advantage. Eventually, with artificial intelligence, money may become irrelevant, particularly in a high-energy civilization in which material abundance eliminates the mindset of scarcity. We have arrived at a time when the methods of science and technology can provide abundance for all. It is no longer necessary to consciously withhold efficiency through planned obsolescence or to utilize an old and outworn monetary system. Although many of us consider ourselves forward thinkers, we still cling tenaciously to old values of the monetary system. We accept without sufficient consideration a system that breeds insufficiencies and actually encourages the creation of shortages. For example, while many concerns about environmental destruction and the misuse of technology are justified, many environmentalists draw bleak scenarios about the future based on present-day methods and shortages. They view environmental destruction from the point of view that existing technologies are wasteful and used irresponsibly. They are accustomed to outmoded concepts and the economic imperatives of sales turnover and customer appeal. Although we recognize that technological development has been misdirected, the benefits far outweigh the negatives. Only the most diehard environmental activist would turn his back on the man-elevating advances made in areas like medicine, communications, power generation, and food production. If human civilization is to endure, it must outgrow our conspicuous waste of time, effort, and natural resources. One area in which we see this is architecture. Resource conservation must be incorporated into our structures. While many urban centers grapple with retrofitting new, more efficient technologies into their existing infrastructures, these efforts fall short of the potential of technology. Not only must we rebuild our thought patterns, but much of our physical infrastructure, including industrial plants, buildings, waterways, power systems, production and distribution process, and transportation systems must be reconstructed from the ground up. Only then can our technology overcome resource deficiencies and provide universal abundance. If we are genuinely concerned about the environment and fellow human beings and want to end territorial disputes, war, crime, poverty, hunger, and other problems that confront us today, the intelligent use of science and technology are the tools with which to achieve a new direction, one that will serve all people and not just a select few. The purpose of this technology is to free people from repetitive and boring jobs and allow them to experience the fullness of human relationships, denied to so many for so long. This will call for a basic adjustment in the way we think about what makes us human. Our times demand the declaration of the world's resources as the common heritage of all people. Let me read that again because that's really important. Our times demand the declaration of the world's resources as the common heritage of all people. In 100 years, historians may look back on our present civilization as a transition period from the dark ages of ignorance, superstition, and social insufficiency, just as we view the world a few hundred years ago. If we arrive at a saner world in which maximum human potential is cultivated in every person, our descendants will not understand why our world produced only one Louis Pasteur, one Edison, one Tesla, or one Salk, and why great achievements in our age were the products of a relative few. In looking forward to this new millennia and back at the dimmest memories of human civilization, we see that the thoughts, dreams, and visions of humanity are limited by a perception of scarcity. We are products of a culture of deficiency, which expects each confrontation and most activities to end with a winner and a loser. Funding restricts even technological development, which has the best potential to liberate humanity from its past insufficiencies. We can no longer afford the luxury of such primitive thinking. There are other ways of looking at our lives and the world. Either we learn to live together in full cooperation, or we will cause our own extinction. To fully understand and appreciate this coming age, we must understand the relationship between creation and creator, the machine, and as of this writing, the most marvelous of mechanisms, the human being. Excellent. Let's see if we're still good here. Excellent. Okay, so chapter 2. Changing values in an emerging culture. And by the way, if you are listening to this, and I hope you find this valuable, feel free to leave comments, but please be mindful of what you're writing. Any hateful comments most definitely probably will be deleted, although I like holding a space for open opinion. I find that most people are just here to rant on YouTube rather than actually do the deep thinking themselves. So please actually give something that's going to contribute to other viewers rather than a blatant opinion, which Jock is pretty firm on something that will change in the future world. Okay, so chapter 2, Changing Values in an Emerging Culture. Any attempt to depict the future direction of civilization must include a description of the probable evolution of our culture without embellishment, propaganda, or national interest. We must re-examine our traditional habits of thought if we wish to avoid the consequences that will occur if we do not prepare for the future. It is unfortunate that most of us envision this future within our present social framework using values and traditions that come from the past. Superficial changes perpetuate the problems of today. The challenges we face now cannot be addressed with antiquated. If I said that wrong, all good. But yeah, antiquated notions and values that are no longer relevant. Antiquated, yes. Thank you. You guys don't see my partner, but he's correcting me on that. Antiquated, which, by the way, it's probably worth me looking up thefreedictionary.com. Anytime I don't know a word or if I want to refresh myself on it, I like to go use a resource called thefreedictionary.com. It's been really useful for me. Okay, notions and values that are no longer relevant. Imagine a new planet with the same carrying capacity as Earth, and that you are free to design a new direction for society on this planet. You can choose any shape or form. The only limitation imposed upon you is that your social design must correspond to the carrying capacity of the planet. This new planet has more than adequate arable land, clean air and water, and an abundance of untapped resources. This is your planet. You can rearrange the entire social order to correspond to whatever you consider the best of all possible worlds. Not only does this include environmental modification, but also human factors, interpersonal relationships, and the structuring of education. This need not be complicated. It can be an uncluttered approach, not burdened by any past or traditional considerations, religious or otherwise. This is a prestigious project calling for many disciplines, determining the way inhabitants of your planet conduct their lives, keeping in mind for whom and for what ends this social order is being designed. Feel free to transcend present realities and reach for new and inventive ideas to shape your world of the future. An exciting exercise, isn't it? What we propose is nothing more, nothing less than applying that exercise to our planet. To prepare for the future, we must be willing to test new concepts. This means we must acquire enough information to evaluate these concepts and not be like travelers into a foreign land who compare everything with their own hometown. To understand people of another place, we must set aside our usual expectations of behavior and not judge by the values to which we are accustomed. If you believe today's values and virtues are absolute and ultimate for all times and all civilizations, then you may find our project of the future shocking and unacceptable. We must feel and think as freshly as possible about the limitless possibilities of life patterns humankind may explore for attaining even higher levels of intelligence and fulfillment in the future. Although individuals like Plato, Edward Bellamy, H. G. Wells, Karl Marx, and Howard Scott have all made attempts to plan a new civilization, the established social order considered impractical dreamers with utopian designs that ran contrary to human nature. Against these social pioneers was a status quo of vested interests comfortable with the way things were. The populace at large, because of years of indoctrination, went along unthinkingly for the ride. Vested interests were unappointed guardians of the status quo. The outlook and philosophy of the leaders were consistent with their positions of advantage. Despite advances achieved through objective scientific investigation and the breaking down of long-standing fears and superstitions, the world is still not a reasonable place. Many attempts to make it so have failed because of selfish individual and national interests. Deeply rooted cultural norms that assume someone must lose for someone else to gain, scarcity at its most basic, still dictate most of our decisions. For example, we still cling to the concept of competition and accept inadequate compensation for people's efforts, i.e., minimum wage, when such concepts no longer apply to our capabilities and resources, never mind their effect on human dignity and any possible elevation of the human condition. At this turning point in our civilization, we find problems compiled by the fact that many of us still wait for someone, a messiah perhaps, the elusive they, or an extraterrestrial to save us. The irony is that as we wait for someone to do it for us, we give up our freedom of choice and movement. We react rather than act toward events and issues. The future is our responsibility, but change will not take place until the majority lose their confidence in their dictators and elected officials' ability to solve problems. It will likely take an economic catastrophe resulting in enormous human suffering to bring about true social change. Unfortunately, this does not guarantee that the change will be beneficial. In times of conflicts between nations, we still default to answering perceived threats with threats, developing weapons of mass destruction, and training people to use them against others whom we regard as enemies. Many social reforms tried to solve problems of crime within the framework of the monetary system by building more prisons and enacting new laws. There were gun legislations and a 3 times and you're out provision in an attempt to govern crime and violence. This accomplished little. Yet requests for its funding to build more prisons and hire more policemen far better in legislators in voting referendums than do pleas for education or aid to the poor. Somehow, in an area of plenty, we have meanly approved punishment as an answer to all problems. One symptom of insanity is repeating the same mistake over and over again and expecting a different outcome. Our society is, in this sense, truly insane. The Manhattan Project developed the first atomic device to be used against the human population and launched the most intensive and dangerous weapons buildup in history. The Manhattan Project was also one of the largest and best financed projects ever undertaken. If we are willing to spend that amount of money, resources, and human lives in time of war, why don't we commit equal resources to improving lives and anticipating the human needs of the future? The same energies that went into the Manhattan Project could be used to improve and update our way of life, and to achieve and maintain the optimal symbiotic relationship between nature and humankind. If our system continues without modification involving environmental and social concern, we will face an economic and social breakdown of our monetary and political system. When this occurs, the established government will likely enact a state of emergency or a martial law to prevent total chaos. I do not advocate this, but without the suffering of millions, it may be nearly impossible to shake our complacency about the current ways of life. Out of the Dark Ages. Scientists in the space program face different challenges. For example, space scientists must develop new ways of eating in outer space. Astronauts' clothing must withstand the vacuum of outer space. Enormous temperature differentials and radiation. I hope you guys are laughing along with me. Differentials and radiation yet remains light in weight and highly flexible. This new clothing design even calls for the development of self-repairing systems. Their challenge is to conceive of common items in completely new ways. In space, for example, clothing no longer functions just as a body covering and adornment. It becomes a mini habitat. The space age is a good example of the search for newer and better ways of doing things. As scientists probe the limits of our universe, they must generate newer techniques and technologies for unexplored frontiers and never before encountered environments. If they cling to the concepts of their earlier training, their explorations will fail. Had our ancestors refused to accept new ideas, the physical sciences would have progressed little beyond the covered wagon. Okay, just a moment, let me make sure that we're still good here. Yeah, looks like we are. And give me 1 second I want to make that bigger. Okay. Excuse me for just a second. Okay. Many young engineers, scientists, and architects face this dilemma. Bold and creative, they exit institutions of higher learning and step out into the world, eager for change. They set out with great enthusiasm, but are often beaten back and slowed by the established institutions and self-appointed guardians of tradition. Occasionally, some break away from traditional concepts and become innovations that their daring concepts are soon reduced to mediocrity. Many of the dominant values shaping our present society are medieval. The idea that we live in an enlightened age or an age of reason has little basis in fact. We are overwhelmed with valid information concerning ourselves and our planet, but have no inkling of how to apply it. Most of our customs and modes of behavior have been handed down to us from the Dark Ages. It was difficult for early forms of life to crawl out of a premortal slime without dragging some of it with them. So it is with entrenched value systems. The most appropriate place for traditional concepts is a museum or in books about the history of civilization. The 21st century will reveal what most people never suspected, which is the majority of us have the potential of people like Leonardo da Vinci, Alexandra Graham Bell, and Madame Curie. If we are raised in an environment that encourages genuine individuality and creativity, this includes all other characteristics thought of as this special and privileged heredity of great men and women. Even in today's so-called democratic society, fewer than 4% of the world's people have supplied us with scientific and artistic advantages that sustain social systems, shaping human values. Humans of the future, though similar in appearance, will differ considerably in their outlook, values, and mindset. Social order of the past that have continued into the 21st century consistently seeks to generate loyalty and conformity to established institutions as the only means to sustain a workable society. Countless laws, often passed after a misdeed has occurred, have been enacted in an attempt to govern the conduct of people. Those who do not conform are ostracized or imprisoned. In the past, many social reforms and those called agitators by their detractors were not generally angry, maladjusted individuals. They were often people with a sensitivity and concern for the needs of others, who envisioned a better life for all. Among these were abolitionists, advocates for women's suffrage and child labor laws, those who practiced nonviolent resistance to oppression, and so-called, quote, freedom fighters. Today we accept without question the achievements of these reformers who faced violent opposition, imprisonment, ridicule, and even death from vested interests in the established order. Unfortunately, most people are unaware of the identities of those individuals who helped pave the way towards social enlightenment. Many of our parks have statues of warriors and statesmen, but few have any monuments to really good social innovators. Perhaps when the history of the human race is finally written, it will be from the viewpoint of individuals in an alien and primitive culture who sought a change in a world that had a great tenacity to maintain things as they were. That's sad. Conformity to population makes control of society much easier for its leaders. Our leaders pay lip service to the freedoms that democracy provides, while actually supporting an economic structure that imprisons its citizens under more and more debt. They claim that all have the opportunity to rise to the top through individual initiative and incentive, to appease those who work hard but do not achieve the good life. Religion is there to assure them that if it's not this life, they will obtain it in the next. Wow. It's a fantastic scam, if you ask me. Our habits of thought and conduct show the effectiveness of constant and unrelenting propaganda on radio, television, and publications and in most other media. They're so effective that the average citizen is not insulted when categorized as a consumer, as if a citizen's sole worth to society was a user of goods. These patterns are gradually being modified and challenged by the internet and the World Wide Web. Most people expect that our televisions, computers, communication systems, methods of production and delivery of service, and even our concept of work and reward will continue to improve without any disruption or distress within our present value systems. But this is not necessarily so. Our dominant values that emphasize competition and scarcity limit continued progress. The most disruptive period in transition from an established social order to an emergent system comes when people are not prepared emotionally or intellectually to adjust to change. People cannot simply erase all the beliefs and habits acquired in the past, which constitutes their self-identity. Sudden changes in values without some preparation will cause many to lose their sense of identity and purpose, isolating them from a society that they feel has passed them by. Another factor limiting the evaluation of alternative social proposals is a lack of understanding of basic scientific principles and the factors shaping culture and behavior. The conflict today between human beings is about opposing values. If we manage to arrive at a saner future, conflicts will be about problems common to all humans. In a vibrant and emergent culture, instead of conflicts between nations, the challenges will be overcoming scarcity, reclaiming damaged environments, creating innovative technology, increasing agricultural yields, improving communications, building communications between nations, sharing technologies, and living a meaningful life. Work and the new leisure. From early civilization to the present, most humans had to work to earn a living. Most of our attitudes about work are a carryover from these earlier times. In the past, and still in many low-energy cultures, it was necessary to fetch water and carry it to one's dwelling place. People gathered wood to make fires for heating and cooking, and fuel to burn in their lamps. It would have been very difficult, and still is for some, to imagine a time when water would rush forth into your own dwelling at the turn of a handle. To press a button for instant light would have seemed to be magic. People of ancient times probably wondered what they would do with their time if they did not have to engage in these burdensome tasks that were so necessary to sustain their lives. In most developed countries, tasks that were once so vital to people's very survival are no longer necessary, thanks to modern technology. Today, people attend schools to acquire marketable skills that enable them to earn a living in the, quote, work-a-day world. Recently, the belief that one must work to earn a living has been challenged. Working for a living to supply the necessities of life may soon be irrelevant as modern technology can provide most of these needs. As a result, many jobs have gone the way of the iceman and the elevator operator. Perhaps we have a semantic problem with the word, quote, work. The idea of, quote, freedom from work should include the elimination of repetitive and boring tasks that hold our intellectual growth. Most jobs, from blue-collar assembly worker to professional, entail repetitious and uninteresting tasks. Human beings possess an untapped potential that they will finally be able to explore once they are free of the burden of having to work to earn a living. At present, there are no plans in government or industry to make economic adjustments to deal with the displacement of people by automated technology. It is no longer the repetitious work of laborers that cybernation is able to phase out, but also many other vocations and professions. Engineers, technicians, scientists, doctors, architects, artists, and actors will have their roles altered, sometimes drastically. Therefore, it is imperative that we explore alternatives so as to improve our social constructs, belief, and the quality of life to secure and sustain a future for all. Chapter 3. Language of Relevance. Of the many entrenched barriers to positive change, communication is one of the most intractable. Language has evolved over centuries through ages of scarcity, superstition, and social insufficiency, and it is continuing to evolve. However, language often contains ambiguity and uncertainty when important issues are at stake, and fails to use a precise and universally intelligible means of conveying knowledge. It is difficult for the average person, or even those considered above average, including leaders of nations, to share ideas with others whose worldview may be at a considerable variance with their own. Also, because of semantic differences in different experiences, words have various shades of meaning. What would happen if we made contact with an alien civilization when we have such difficulty making contact with our fellow human beings? We are not ready for that. We haven't yet learned to resolve international differences by peaceful methods, so peace is simply a pause between wars. Even in the United States, supposedly the most technologically advanced country in the world, we lack unified, definitely stated direction. Our policies and goals are fragmented and contradictory. The Democrats cannot communicate meaningfully with the Republicans. Elsewhere, the Israelites oppose the Arabs, the Irish Catholics clash with the Irish Protestants, the Serbs with the Muslims. Everywhere there is interracial and interpersonal disharmony, an inability of husbands and wives to communicate with each other or their children, labor and management strife, and communists differing with capitalists. How, then, could we hope to establish any meaningful communication with an alien civilization with beings possessing intelligence, social coherence, and technologies far in advance of our own? The aliens might well wonder whether there really is intelligent life on Earth. Most world leaders seek to achieve greater communication and understanding among the nations of the world. Unfortunately, their efforts have met with little success. One reason is that each comes to the table determined to achieve the optimal advantage with their own nation. We talk a lot about global development and global cooperation, but the global in each case reflects the individual nation's interests and not those of all people. In addition, we are trapped within old ways of looking at our world. While most agree change is necessary, many limit change if it threatens their advantage, just as on a personal basis they seek change in others, but not in themselves. Many of us lack skills to communicate logically when we are emotionally invested in an outcome. Yes, I myself am working on that, fellow YouTubers. How do you communicate logically when you're emotionally invested? If a person or a group has difficulty in communicating a point in question, rather than seek clarification, they will raise their voices. If this doesn't work, they may resort to physical violence, punishment, or deprivations as a means of achieving the desired behavior. In some instances, deprivation of means of earning a living has been and continues to be used. These tactics have never produced a heightened level of understanding. In fact, many of these attempts to control behavior actually increased violence and drove parties further apart. It will be difficult for a future historian to understand why the language of science and technology was not incorporated into everyday communication. Ambiguity may help lawyers, preachers, and politicians, but it doesn't work in building bridges, dams, power projects, flying machines, or in space travel. For these activities, we need the language of science. Despite a maze of ambiguity in normal conversation, the more serviceable language of science is coming into use throughout the world, particularly in a technologically advanced country. If communication is to improve, we need a language that correlates highly with the environment and human needs. We already have such a language in scientific and technological communities, and it's easily understood by many. In other words, it is already possible to use a coherent means of communication without ambivalence. If we were to apply the same methods used in the physical sciences to psychology, sociology, and the humanities, a lot of unnecessary conflict could be resolved. In engineering, mathematics, chemistry, and other technical fields, we have the nearest thing to a universal descriptive language that requires little in the way of individual interpretation. Yes, and for those of you that may want to further understand the concept of interpretation, I would suggest a course called the Landmark Forum. I'll put it in the notes when I upload this video. It's called the Landmark Forum, and it is all about a 2-day workshop teaching you that you are a meaning-making machine, and everything you're looking at is through the scope of interpretation, and what do you do with that? So it's probably a really good place to start, because if you're reading this, and when somebody first shared that with me, I didn't even know what they meant. They said, Katie, you have this story. And I was like, what story? What are you talking about? And he kind of like chuckled, and he's like, go to Landmark, do your homework, call me back when you're done with a report, which I did, and I would say that it definitely helped me very much understand the limitations, yet the power and the limitations of language. So cool. Cool. How you doing? Hope you're doing all right. Listening in. I hope you're taking some notes. Again, this is The Best That Money Can't Buy by Jacques Fresco. We're mid-chapter 2 here, or 3, I believe. And I'm just putting this up because I was inspired by Jacques, actually, for years, by his vision. I want to be more involved with them, and I know that when I'm sitting at work all day being a wage slave, I really enjoy listening to people chat. And the only thing that was uploaded was only the first 6 chapters of this book, and it was a constant stop. Every chapter they had a discussion with like 6 or 7 people, and it really dragged it out. So I'm hoping to make this go a little bit smoother while still, sharing a few things that I have to add, which you may or may not like, which is fine. Okay, so moving on. So that last little part about interpretation was, in engineering, mathematics, chemistry, and other technical fields, we have the nearest thing to a universal descriptive language that requires little in the way of individual interpretation. For instance, if a blueprint for an automobile is used in any technologically developed society anywhere in the world, the finished product would be the same, that in other areas receiving the same blueprint regardless of their political or religious beliefs. The language used by the average person is inadequate for resolving conflict, but the language of science is relatively free of ambiguities and the conflicts prevalent in our everyday emotionally driven language. It is deliberately designed, as opposed to evolving haphazardly through centuries of cultural change, to state problems in terms that are re-verifiable and readily understood by most. Most technical strides would have been unattainable without this type of improved communication. Without a common descriptive language, we would have been unable to prevent disease, increase crop yields, talk over thousands of miles, or build bridges, dams, transportation systems, and the many other technological marvels of this computerized age. Unfortunately, the same is not true of controversial language. Attempts to discuss or evaluate newer concepts in social design are greatly limited by our habit of comparing newer concepts to existing systems and beliefs. It's a semantic jungle out there. Utopian ideas have existed for as long as humans have dealt with problems and reflected upon a world free of them. The writers of scriptural references to Eden, Plato, Republic, H.G. Wells, Shape of Things to Come, and such concepts as socialism, communism, democracy, and the ultimate expression of bliss, heaven, have all shared this utopian dream. All attempts at creating such a world have fallen far short of their vision. Because the dreamers and visionaries who projected their utopian concepts did so mostly within the framework and values of their existing culture, the language they used was limited and subject to a wide range of individual interpretation. When we read and discuss new ideas, the information is automatically filtered through previous experiences and patterns of associative memory. In many instances, what we end up with is something other than what the designers intended. Unfortunately, we live in a linguistic and semantic jungle. The language we inherited is insufficient and lacks the characteristics needed to allow ideas to be shared. Here's an historical example. When presented with the possibility of transitioning from conventional aircraft to the flying wing during World War II, now employed very effectively in the B-1 stealth bomber, people first noticed the absence of the tail assembly. This new configuration, so different from the conventional, made them uncomfortable and reactions were generally negative. Even technical people question the lack of stability believed to be inherent in the flying wing. They responded with doubt and hostility. Had they used the appropriate language of investigation, they would have instead have asked their designer how he intended to overcome limiting factors in the earlier designs. The designer would have responded by presenting design specifications and, better yet, working models of the subject under discussion. To discuss the redesign of a culture, nor utopian, but simply in accordance with the knowledge and resources we have at hand, we must learn to outgrow our egos in exchange for constructive dialogue rather than debate. Yes, that is so important. I need to read that again because I feel like every comment I have read in regards to Jacques' stuff is exactly what he is trying to express to you that has to change. So I'm going to read that again to you. We must learn to outgrow our egos in exchange for constructive dialogue rather than debate. In addition, we must be capable of stating problems and proposing solutions clearly and succinctly without distortion of meaning or misunderstanding, even when these solutions are radically opposed to accepted norms. So important. What is the solution? I feel like my partner brings this up all this time, and it's so simple to him. I don't know how he is so patient, but he'll be like, "What's the solution? What's the solution?" And people just want to bitch. And I dare say, if that's something that you are interested in doing, I mean, like, you're probably going to be one of those people when things continue, if they do, continue to get worse, that you're going to be sitting there complaining rather than figuring out what are we going to do about this? You know, like what's the solution? I really do think it is a neurosis that we have not found a way to constantly at all times point our attention and our energy into a solution, which for me is often why I don't really want to spend time with a lot of people because I really don't want to sit around and talk about things that are like going wrong. I really would like to put my attention to, well, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm working on, this is what I'm creating, and sometimes that's, you know, they don't want that. So I don't know. I guess, you know, give me a like maybe, or write a comment if you've been familiar with that. And you know what, I commend you if you are listening to this book because that is doing something proactive, right? You're listening to new ideas, hopefully allowing it to sink in. Now, if you have trouble hearing new ideas, I wouldn't imagine if you've been attracted to this kind of information that you do have trouble hearing new ideas, but if you do, you may also, here's another, you know, tip from Katie here, you may want to check out mindset and law of attraction and thoughts. And one of the first things that Louise Hay and You Can Change Your Life or You Can Heal Your Life might also be a great book for you if you have an incredibly violent resistance to change. Or EFT is also really useful. Emotional freedom technique, you can find free videos of that on YouTube, is the very simple idea that you say to yourself, which is, I am willing to change. For me, often, it's I am willing to listen. I am willing to listen. I'm willing to listen. I am willing to change. I'm willing to find solutions. I'm willing to find solutions. So, but just knowing that on a knowledge basis is definitely not going to be enough. Often you're going to need a visceral experience, and that I may not be able to get into here as to how, you know, how you create a spiritual enlightenment experience that would cause you to physically know. There's lots of ways that can happen. Sometimes it's through trauma. Something really bad happens and all of a sudden you make a change in your life. Sometimes it could be through something that you sort of read that inspired you, that initiated that change, or you know, a program. Maybe you saw Zeitgeist and it led you down this path to want to know more. Sometimes it can be through medicinal plants, as tribal people for centuries exposed themselves to. There's lots of different ways, but most definitely I do understand that you can't just say something, you really do have to feel it, and feelings can be an interesting thing that most people don't understand. So anyways, I will quit yapping, I will get back to this. That just very much inspired me, that last little piece that he's talking about. Proposing a solution, and here's my solutions that I shared based on issues that I've dealt with before and worked through. So there you have it. Cool. In addition, we must, that last part was, in addition, we must be capable of stating problems and proposing solutions clearly and succinctly without distortion of meaning or misunderstanding, even when these solutions are radically opposed to accepted norms. Changing language. Language evolves along with the people and their culture. With the development of newer technologies, our everyday language changes accordingly. But today, our technology and culture are so pervasive that we need a language with more uniform meaning throughout the world. We need something like mathematics, a language that avoids semantic differences in interpretation. This new language should have symbols which closely approximate real events in the physical world. An advanced descriptive language will eventually be designed by artificial intelligence and then continuously updated to remain relevant to existing and new situations. As it becomes increasingly obvious that goals must be stated precisely, our language will undergo considerable modification. The future evolution of our language cannot be comprehended within the bounds of existing usage. It must undergo continuing refinement and increase its scope of meaning before it will be an effective means of communication between people. Gutenberg invented the printing press before the English alphabet and spelling has stabilized. Many of our language's idiosyncrasies still endure from the early days of experimentation. No sophistication of phrasing or vocabulary alters the fact that different words and even the same words in different sequences have so many possible interpretations. Their semantic connotations differ from sender to receiver and from receiver to others. Our language has an amazing richness and flexibility and easily accommodates change. But in the absence of mathematical precision, clear communication is a challenge. The future language may transcend words as we know them in favor of a series of sound, sequentially arranged to produce a desired response in others. Language is often an attempt to control behavior through the transfer of information valid, invalid, or even irrelevant to the situation. In the future, people using computers could create a language that will provide closer understanding and a simpler structure with less dependency on speech. For example, a series of signals combining acoustical, optical, olfactory, and telltactile, that's interesting, telltactile electrical pattern will tell a story in seconds rather than in many sentences or pages. Huh. I like that. Side note from me. You know what? I really like that. I don't know how many of you have had the experience of reading a book and being like, dude, that entire chapter could have been summed up in a sentence. But I don't know what it is where we like the idea of dragging things out, But I do think in order for things to speed up, it would. I mean, hence Twitter and all that, right? Like, give it to me in 140 characters or less. Give me all of that. I think that's already a trend we're seeing, and I'm curious to see how it morphs from tell me more with less to, as this suggests, for example, a series of signals combining acoustical, optical, olfactory, and telltactile electrical pattern will tell a story in seconds rather than many sentences or pages. That's fascinating to me, and I would be very interested to see how the language changes to reflect that. Continuing on, such a methodology is not unlike that used by fish to find the, and I might mispronounce this, Orinoco River, not heard of that before, when it's thousands of miles away from their starting point, and they haven't been there before. Fish have receptors that sense the Earth's magnetic field, which to a large extent shapes their behavior. In like manner, imprinting in a bird probably elicits the nest-building pattern. When our technologies are more closely aligned with natural law, airplanes might use geomagnetic fields for navigation just like birds. Wouldn't that be cool? Wow. I've always wondered what, from a bird's eye, literally what it looks like. Kind of cool. The way that they look down and see, that would be really cool. A clearer, more efficient means of communications would entail a more exact expression in human verbal interaction. It could encourage a new area of science, the science of significance and meaning. A more refined language could result in a rearrangement of the associative systems in the human brain, resulting in greater understanding and a reduction in conflict. I would seriously love that. Yes. If this was live, I would have you do a clap on if this was a webinar, this was live, for that concept. A more refined language could result in a rearrangement of the associative systems in the human brain, resulting in greater understanding and a reduction of conflict. I tell you what, That is maybe my biggest qualm in my current understanding of life, is the continual contradiction in reality, the continual contradiction in language itself. I do find it to be very troubling. And I would love to hear something and have a really deep and great understanding without there being like raw food's good for you, but this book says it, but this one, you know what I mean, but this shows that, but this, right, like that being something where you understand it and you understand it and you apply it and off you go, and it doesn't end up being something that folds back on you. I don't know if you've had that experience where you learn information, you're really excited about it, and then it just seems to not work anymore. It seems to not go with this piece of information, and then you feel like, why did I even learn this in the first place, right? It's almost like you take 2 steps forward, 10 back. So I'm all for finding a language that results in greater understanding and reduction in conflict. That would be incredible. I think most issues come from communication and someone thinking it's aggressive or whatever, or someone not liking that or not liking their agreement based on what they said. So cool. Continuing on, and then I'll probably have to cut this off. Yeah, I probably have to cut this about an hour and upload this. And even if no one listens to this, this is kind of for myself as well. But I'm sure, based on just me going through this process of looking for audiobooks, I know that there are other people that are looking for it. I've just seen it in the comments. People have even made notes like, I found this book because of whatever, watching a Jock video. So I hope that this is somewhat helpful. I hope you can keep your comments about this, that, and the other to yourself, because I kind of think it's a waste of space, and your contribution to the solution. So again, let's put this into practice. What is your solution? How much of this have you actually read? How many of the books that he suggests have you actually read, cover to cover? Have you gone through and watched the Zeitgeist, all 3 of them? Have you watched Future Vibe Design? Have you actually done the brain work and the thinking work so that you can formulate your own opinion? Or are you taking something that you heard from somebody else and parroting it back, which is pretty much all of your life and all of schooling, is somebody else telling you something and you repeating it back. So that obviously has gotten us to where it's gotten us, where we just agree, we go with it. But I would say if you're somebody attracted to the Venus Project, then you're somebody that wants to see something change. Perhaps you have a little bit of that rebel in you, according to society, because you want to think differently. You ask a lot of questions. So with that being said, I would love it if you would share your solutions, or what you like about what you've heard, or how you would want to contribute in this new world. So if you didn't have to do your boring job, what would you want to contribute to? For me, I would personally want to spend my days understanding and contributing to robotics. I'm also very interested in this idea that if we use more of our brain capacity, that we could become godlike in the sense that we can regenerate. I think that if an animal can regenerate an arm, I think we can get to a place of physics of understanding and regenerate. I really do think that we could have extra senses. So in a world like that, I think it's some of my time figuring out solutions to that, however that may look. So, next part, bridges over troubled water. A myth is a concept or tale that has no factual evidence or proof. The word suggests a way of talking or stating problems in which the words used do not have a physical referent. That is to say, one cannot find agreement among people as to what, one cannot find agreement among people as to what, in the real world, the words are actually referring to. In this context, the author fears the idea of resolving conflict on the basis of mutual understanding is a myth as well. For example, the likelihood of Jewish people resolving their conflict with Nazis through a free exchange of views is extremely remote, if not impossible. The same would be true if a well-educated African American attempted to resolve a conflict with white supremacist organizations, or a scientist tried sharing the theory of evolution with religious fundamentalists. This illustrates what humans as yet are not yet rational beings. Our current values of right and wrong, good and bad, are the products of older social systems. Slogans and catchphrases like God is on our side, think American, successful person, well-adjusted, mature outlook, and sharing ideas are all judgments and assessments reflecting the culture in which they originated. If we genuinely hope to bridge differences, we need a more precise language and a mindset open to new ideas. Actually, there is no sharing of values and no communication at all if the parties don't have a common starting point, or are unwilling, unable to conceive of experiences outside of their own. If a person believes that it is impossible to build a flying machine, the builder of a flying machine cannot share his or her knowledge about the idea, especially if the doubting party doesn't ask how it can be accomplished, or has already dismissed it in his or her mind. How then, in a society that is culture-bound and has limited language and ideas, can we introduce listeners to new concepts which, even if they desire to learn from them, have no connections in their experience and thinking? We live in a perpetual show-me state. When Nikola Tesla first introduced the wireless, there was no common understanding of methods and dynamics of wireless transmission. So Tesla orientated the uninformed to a demonstration of the working processes. In like manner, films, books, seminars, videos will be necessary to demonstrate the validity of our proposals. Okay, awesome. So that was chapter 1, 2, and 3. And I'm going to cut it and come back for 4, 5, and 6. I hope you guys enjoyed this. And make sure, if you want to purchase this, you can definitely get it on Amazon. You can also get it on directly from theviewinthisproject.com's website. If you want to get a hard copy, give it to a friend. We would definitely encourage that, and there will be a link also in this video for you, a link for you to purchase it if you'd like to do so. Okay, that is it.